The struggling woman, Marlene Johnson, was a woman who carried more weight on her shoulders than most could imagine. She was in her early 30s, living in a small southern town where everyone seemed to know each other's business. Life had never been kind to her. She grew up poor, often wearing hand-me-down clothes that didn't fit, eating whatever scraps her mother could put on the table. When she became an adult, she thought life might finally give her a better chance. But reality turned out to be far more difficult. Marlene worked 2 jobs, one at a diner in the mornings and another cleaning offices at night. She often returned home past midnight, her hands rough and cracked from hours of scrubbing floors, her feet aching from standing all day. Her tiny apartment was barely enough for one person, and even then it leaked when it rained. Still, she managed to keep her head up because she had always believed in one thing. No matter how hard life gets, kindness should never leave your heart. But being a black woman in a town filled with quiet prejudices was not easy. People often looked at her as if she didn't belong, as if she would never be more than a tired waitress or a cleaner. Some customers at the diner would snap their fingers at her, calling her girl, refusing to use her name. She swallowed her pride every single time, not because she was weak, but because she needed the paycheck. Her life seemed to run in circles: work, sleep, pay bills, repeat. There was no excitement, no future, no one waiting for her when she came home. Loneliness became her only companion. She dreamed at night of something more, a family maybe, or even just someone who cared if she came home safe. But those dreams always faded in the morning when the alarm clock rang at 5 a.m. One cold December evening, after finishing her late shift at the diner, Marlene decided to take a different route home. The streets were almost empty, lit by the yellow glow of flickering street lamps. She pulled her worn coat tighter around her body, trying to block out the sharp wind. That's when she saw them, 4 children huddled together outside the grocery store. They were sitting on the cold concrete, their clothes dirty, their faces pale and tired. The oldest boy couldn't have been more than 13, and the youngest girl looked around 6. They had no blankets, no food, nothing but each other. Marlene stopped in her tracks. Her first instinct was to keep walking. She didn't have enough for herself. How could she possibly help them? But then she looked closer. The little girl was crying softly, her lips trembling, and the boy was trying to comfort her even though his own eyes were red with hunger. Marlene felt something deep in her chest twist. She knew that feeling, the pain of having nothing, the fear of being forgotten by the world. Without thinking too much, she walked toward them. "Are y'all okay?" she asked gently, her voice soft but steady. The children looked up, startled. The boy shook his head. We don't got nowhere to go," he whispered. Marlene's heart broke in that moment. She knew she couldn't just leave them there in the cold. She thought about her small apartment, about the bills waiting on her kitchen table, about the fact that she barely had enough food for herself. But then she thought about what would happen if she turned her back. She couldn't do it. Not to them. "Come with me," she said finally. The children hesitated, unsure if they could trust her. But something in Marlene's eyes, something strong yet kind, made them believe. Slowly they stood up and followed her. That night, Marlene gave them everything she could. She made soup with the little she had in her kitchen, let them sleep in her tiny living room on the old couch and blankets she pulled from the closet. She stayed awake most of the night, watching over them, making sure they felt safe. For the first time in a long while, her apartment didn't feel so empty. Marlene didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know how she would feed 4 extra mouths or explain it to anyone. But she did know one thing. Those children were no longer alone. And maybe, just maybe, neither was she. As dawn broke through the thin curtains of her apartment, Marlene sat quietly, sipping her cup of black coffee. The children were still asleep, huddled together under the blankets. She looked at them and felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She didn't know it yet, but that single act of compassion would change all of their lives forever. Building a family. The next morning, the smell of warm soup and the sound of clinking dishes woke the children. Marlene stood in her small kitchen, stirring the last bit of oatmeal she had. She had stretched the ingredients as far as possible, but it was barely enough for 5 people. Still, when she placed the bowls on the table, she smiled at them as if it were a feast. The children sat shyly, unsure if they should eat. The oldest boy glanced at Marlene with worried eyes. "You don't got enough for yourself," he said quietly. Marlene gave a small laugh. "Don't you worry about me, eat. You need it more than I do." At first the children hesitated, but soon hunger took over. They ate quickly, wiping their bowls clean. Marlene watched them, her chest tightening. She thought of all the times she had gone to bed hungry as a child, and how she had promised herself she would never let another soul feel that way if she could help it. That morning she finally learned their names. The oldest boy was Jamal, only 13 but already carrying the weight of an adult. He had tried his best to take care of his younger siblings after their mother disappeared, and their father went to jail. The second was Lisa, 10 years old, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. Then came Michael, only 8, quiet and thoughtful. And finally little Grace, the youngest at 6, who clung to Jamal's arm whenever she felt scared. Marlene listened as Jamal explained how they had been sleeping behind stores, eating scraps when they could find them. No one had wanted to take them in, and they had run out of options. He spoke with shame as if it was his fault, but Marlene shook her head. "You're just kids," she said firmly. "This ain't your burden to carry." That day, Marlene made a decision that would change her life forever. She told herself she would not let those children go back to the streets. She didn't know how she would manage it, but she knew deep down it was the right thing to do. Life, however, quickly proved to be difficult. Marlene's paycheck was already stretched thin, and now she had 4 growing children under her roof. She worked longer hours, sometimes skipping sleep just to earn extra tips at the diner. She patched up old clothes, mended shoes, and learned to make a full meal out of the simplest ingredients. The children noticed her sacrifices. Lisa would often try to help by washing dishes or sweeping the floor, even when Marlene told her not to worry. Jamal looked for odd jobs, mowing lawns, carrying groceries to bring home a few dollars. Little Grace, too small to help, would crawl onto Marlene's lap after long days and whisper, "Thank you, Mama." The first time she heard that word, Mama, Marlene's eyes filled with tears. At first she resisted. She wasn't really their mother. She reminded herself it was temporary, that one day someone else might take them in officially. But as the weeks passed, she realized the truth. She wasn't just caring for them out of pity. She was loving them, in the way a mother loves her children, and they in turn were beginning to see her as family. The town, however, was not always kind. Whispers followed her wherever she went. People wondered why a single black woman, already struggling, would take in 4 extra mouths. Some accused her of using them for attention. Others said she was foolish, that she would ruin her own life. Marlene ignored the gossip. "They don't know us," she would say to the children. "We know who we are. That's all that matters." And slowly they began to build a life together. Mornings were filled with laughter as Michael and Grace fought over who got the last piece of toast. Afternoons meant homework at the kitchen table, with Marlene helping even when her own eyes were heavy with sleep. Nights were for stories, sometimes made-up fairy tales, sometimes the hard truths of life that she wanted them to learn before the world taught them cruelly. She set rules in the house: respect one another, work hard in school, and never forget where you came from. Jamal, though stubborn at times, obeyed because he admired Marlene's strength. Lisa, with her sharp eyes, learned to trust. Michael started drawing pictures, something he had been too scared to do before. And Grace, always full of giggles, brought light into their darkest moments. Years began to pass. Seasons changed, and with them so did the children. They grew taller, smarter, and more confident. At school, teachers noticed the difference. Where once they had been quiet and withdrawn, now they raised their hands, spoke up, and dreamed big. They still carried scars from the streets, but Marlene's love was healing them piece by piece. One evening, after another long day at the diner, Marlene came home to find the children waiting with a surprise. They had drawn a big picture of their family, 5 stick figures holding hands with the words, "We love you," Mama written across the top. Marlene held the paper in her hands, her throat tight, her vision blurred with tears. In that moment, she realized that she had not just taken in 4 homeless kids. She had gained something she had always longed for, a family of her own. And though life was still hard, Marlene no longer felt alone. She had a reason to keep going, a reason to fight, and most importantly, a reason to hope. The weight of sacrifice. Marlene had never imagined her life would become so heavy and yet so meaningful at the same time. Taking in 4 children filled her heart with love, but it also brought new struggles she could never have prepared for. Every day was a test of strength, patience, and sacrifice. Her mornings started before sunrise. While the children were still asleep, Marlene would drag herself out of bed, her back aching from the hard work of the day before. She cooked whatever food she could gather, sometimes just biscuits and gravy, other times only oatmeal watered down to make it stretch. She packed school lunches with peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, always making sure the children had something to carry in their bags, even if it meant she went hungry. At the diner, she smiled at customers and carried heavy trays of food, even when her legs felt like giving out. At night, she mopped floors in office buildings until her hands grew raw. Some nights she returned home so tired she barely had the energy to change out of her work clothes. But the moment she stepped into her small apartment and saw the children safe and smiling, she found the strength to keep going. The bills, however, never stopped coming. Rent, electricity, food, school supplies, all of it added up faster than the money she earned. Marlene often sat at the kitchen table late at night, staring at the pile of envelopes. She would take a deep breath, whisper a short prayer, and decide which bill could wait another week. More than once she went to bed without dinner just so the children could eat. The children noticed. Jamal, being the oldest, worried the most. He would sometimes push his plate away, saying he wasn't hungry, even though his stomach growled. But Marlene would catch him every time. "Don't you dare," she'd say gently. "I'd rather go without than see you hungry." Lisa tried to help by finding ways to save money. She learned how to sew small tears in their clothes, using old thread Marlene kept in a tin box. Michael would quietly slip coins he earned from drawing little sketches for classmates into Marlene's purse. And Grace, still small, would simply hug Marlene tight and whisper, "It's okay, Mama, we got you." Despite their efforts, the weight was still heavy. There were nights Marlene cried silently into her pillow, careful not to wake the children. She questioned herself, wondered if she had made a mistake by taking on so much responsibility. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered that cold December night when she first saw them shivering on the street. She remembered the look in their eyes, the same look she once carried as a child, and she knew she could never abandon them. Still, the town never stopped judging her. People whispered cruel things behind her back. Some said she was using the children to get government help, even though she received almost nothing. Others said she was a fool, that she would end up broken. Sometimes those words reached the children, and they would ask Marlene why people talked that way. She always answered the same, because they don't know love the way we do. Don't ever let their words change who you are. School brought its own challenges. The children often faced teasing for wearing old clothes or shoes that didn't quite fit. But Marlene encouraged them every day. "Walk with your head high," she told them. "It don't matter what you wear. It matters what's in your heart and mind." Her words became their shield. Slowly, the children learned to ignore the laughter of others and focus on their studies. Teachers began to notice their progress. Jamal excelled in math. Lisa showed talent in writing. Michael found joy in art, and Grace loved to sing. Each of them was discovering something special inside, and Marlene made sure they never forgot their worth. But nurturing their dreams meant even more sacrifices for Marlene. She skipped shifts when one of the children was sick, even though it meant losing money. She stayed up late to help with homework, even when her eyes burned with exhaustion. She worked harder than ever to keep a roof over their heads, even as her body grew tired and worn. One evening, after another long day, Marlene sat on the porch with Jamal. The boy had been quiet all night, and she sensed something was weighing on him. Finally, he spoke. "Mama," he said softly, "you don't gotta do all this for us. You're working yourself too hard. What if something happens to you?" Marlene placed a hand on his shoulder. "Something already did happen to me, Jamal. I found you 4, and you gave me a reason to keep going. Don't you see? You saved me as much as I saved you." Those words stayed with Jamal for years. He realized then that Marlene's sacrifices were not a burden she carried unwillingly. They were acts of love, pure and powerful. The weight of sacrifice was crushing at times, but Marlene wore it with quiet pride. She knew the world would never give her applause, never offer her comfort. But she didn't need the world's approval. All she needed was to see her children safe, growing, and dreaming of a future beyond the pain of their past. Every choice she made, every dollar she stretched, every night she went without sleep, it was all for them. And though she could not see it yet, those sacrifices were planting seeds. Seeds of resilience, determination, and love that would one day grow into something far greater than she ever imagined. Trouble knocks at the door. For many years, Marlene's little family had learned how to survive storms together. Life was never easy, but somehow they always managed to push forward. The children were growing older, smarter, and stronger. Jamal was already talking about going to college. Lisa dreamed of becoming a writer. Michael sketched pictures that looked more real each day. And little Grace sang with a voice that made neighbors stop and listen. Marlene carried pride in her heart. She believed their future would be brighter than her own past. But fate, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. One summer evening, the town was shaken by a tragedy. A robbery had gone wrong at a corner store just 2 blocks from where Marlene lived. The owner, a man everyone knew, was killed. Fear spread quickly and the town wanted answers. They wanted someone to blame. For Marlene, the storm came faster than she ever expected. 2 days after the robbery, police cars pulled up outside her apartment. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls and curious neighbors gathered, whispering as officers knocked hard on her door. The children froze, panic filling their eyes. Marlene, though confused, told them to stay calm. She opened the door. "Are you Marlene Johnson?" one officer asked. "Yes," she answered carefully. "You're under arrest for the murder of Robert Wilson." The words struck her like a knife. She blinked, unable to understand. "What? That's not possible. I don't even—" But before she could finish, her hands were pulled behind her back. Cold steel cuffs locked around her wrists. The children cried out, clinging to her, but the officers pushed them aside. Marlene's last words to them as she was led away were, "Stay together. Don't be afraid. Mama loves you." The town's gossip turned crueler overnight. People who once nodded politely at Marlene now spat her name like poison. Of course she did it, some said. She was always desperate for money. Others claimed she had been too good to be true, that no one could raise 4 kids out of kindness alone. The truth didn't matter to them. In their eyes, she was guilty before she even stepped into a courtroom. The trial moved quickly. The prosecution painted Marlene as a struggling woman who snapped under pressure. They showed the jury her overdue bills, her long hours of work, and her connection to the neighborhood. They said she must have gone to the store that night, looking for money, and killed the owner when things went wrong. The evidence was thin, just a witness who thought they saw someone like her near the store, and a few fingerprints on a counter where she had bought groceries weeks earlier. But prejudice was stronger than truth. Being a poor black woman in a small town meant the odds were stacked against her from the start. The children sat in the courtroom, holding hands tightly, watching as their whole world collapsed. Jamal wanted to stand up and shout that she could never hurt anyone. Lisa wrote letters to the judge begging him to believe. Michael drew pictures of their family, hoping someone would see them and understand. Grace cried every night, whispering, "Mama's coming home, right?" But the jury didn't see their love. They only saw a woman the town had already judged. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read: guilty of murder. Marlene's body trembled. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she looked back at her children and saw their terrified faces. She forced herself to stand tall, even as her heart shattered. When the judge sentenced her to life in prison, the courtroom erupted in whispers. The children broke down in tears, but Marlene called out one last time, "Stay strong. Don't give up on me. I love you." Prison was a nightmare Marlene never imagined for herself. The cold walls, the endless noise, the loss of freedom, it all weighed on her soul. But what hurt most wasn't the bars around her. It was being torn away from the children she had sacrificed everything for. Every night she lay awake wondering if they were safe, if they had enough to eat, if they remembered the lessons she had taught them. Meanwhile, the children struggled without her. They were shuffled between relatives, foster care, and even nights on their own. But through it all, they held on to one promise. They would never forget what Marlene had done for them. They would not let her sacrifices be wasted. The town soon forgot the details of the case, but the children never forgot the truth. They knew Marlene was innocent. They knew she was paying for a crime she never committed. And though they were still young, a fire was lit inside each of them. They would grow, they would survive, and one day, they would come back for her. For now, though, Marlene sat behind bars, holding on to hope with trembling hands. She whispered prayers into the night, not for herself, but for the 4 children she loved more than life itself. She had saved them once. Deep down, she believed, they would save her too. The children grow up. The day Marlene was taken away felt like the world had ended for her 4 children. That night, Jamal sat awake, staring at the empty space where Marlene used to sit after work. The apartment felt colder, quieter, and lonelier than ever. But in the middle of their pain, one truth kept repeating in their hearts. Marlene had raised them to be strong. They could not fall apart. At first, life was scattered. The children were sent to live with different relatives, shuffled between homes that never felt like home. Some relatives took them in out of duty, not love. Others made it clear the children were a burden. Jamal fought to keep them together, always reminding his siblings, "We're family." Mama would want us to stick close. It wasn't easy. Jamal, still only a teenager, carried the role of protector. He took on part-time jobs, bagging groceries and mowing lawns, determined to provide for his siblings when adults failed them. Every dollar he earned, he saved for their school supplies, their clothes, their little meals together. Some nights he skipped eating so his younger brother and sisters wouldn't have to. Lisa, who had always been sharp and curious, turned her pain into words. She filled notebooks with poems, stories, and letters, many of them addressed to Marlene in prison. She wrote about missing her warmth, about the injustice they had faced, and about her dreams of one day telling the world the truth. Michael, the quiet one, escaped into drawing. He carried a small sketchbook everywhere, filling it with pictures of their family together. Marlene smiling, Grace singing, Jamal holding them close. His art became a window into their souls, a way to hold on to what they were afraid of losing. And little Grace, though the youngest, carried the greatest piece of Marlene in her heart. She kept her voice strong, singing the songs Marlene used to hum in the kitchen. Whenever her siblings felt like giving up, Grace would sing, and her soft voice reminded them of home. Through the years, they grew. Life was not kind, but it taught them resilience. Jamal became the rock, graduating high school while working nights. He earned a scholarship not just for his grades, but for the determination teachers saw in him. He chose to study criminal justice, saying one day, "If the law failed Mama, then I'm going to make sure it doesn't fail anyone else." Lisa excelled in writing competitions, her essays filled with honesty and fire. Teachers said her words carried weight far beyond her age. She dreamed of becoming a journalist, someone who could use truth as a weapon against lies. Michael's art won him recognition too. By the time he was in high school, his sketches were displayed at local exhibits. He wanted to show the world beauty, even from pain.
"Mama always said the world was ugly sometimes," he told his siblings, "but she also said we could make it better."
"This is how I'll do it." And Grace, growing into a young woman, never lost her music. Her voice matured, rich and powerful, and she began singing at school events, church choirs, and community gatherings. People often said she sang with her soul, as if every note carried the memory of someone she refused to forget. Despite their progress, the weight of their mother's wrongful conviction never left them. Every holiday felt incomplete, every birthday was bittersweet. They visited Marlene whenever they could, sitting across the glass window, holding phones to their ears. "Mama, we're doing good," Jamal would say, trying to sound strong. Lisa would slide folded papers through the slot, poems and letters she had written. Michael would show her sketches, pressed against the glass so she could see, and Grace would sing softly into the receiver, her voice filling Marlene's tired heart with light. Marlene would smile through her tears. "I'm so proud of you," she'd whisper. "You're everything I dreamed you'd be." But even as they grew into strong young adults, anger simmered inside them. They knew their mother was innocent. They knew the system had failed her, failed them. And though they were still young, they made a silent vow each time they left that prison. One day they would bring her home. Years passed. Jamal graduated and started working with a law firm that helped families like his own. Lisa's articles began appearing in local papers, raising questions about justice and race in their community. Michael earned a scholarship to an art school, using his work to highlight stories of resilience and injustice. Grace's singing began to draw larger crowds, her voice carrying a message of hope wherever she went. They were no longer children. They were fighters. One evening, after a long day, the 4 of them sat together at Jamal's small apartment. Papers were spread out on the table, Old trial documents, witness statements, police reports. Jamal leaned over them with determination in his eyes. "It's time," he said. "We've done everything Mama asked of us. We studied, we worked, we built our lives. Now it's our turn to fight for her." Lisa nodded, her eyes sharp. "We'll write her story. We'll show the world the truth." Michael opened his sketchbook, turning to a drawing of Marlene smiling with her children. "We'll remind them who she really is, and Grace," her voice steady and sure, whispered, "we'll bring Mama home." That night, their journey began, not just as survivors of tragedy but as warriors of truth. They had carried Marlene's love through every hardship, and now as grown men and women they were ready to carry her fight. The children she had saved from the streets were no longer helpless. They had grown into the very people who would one day save her. The fight for justice. The promise they made that night around Jamal's table was not just words. It became their mission. For years, Marlene's children had carried her lessons of strength and love. Now they carried her fight. Jamal took the lead. With his degree in criminal justice, he understood how the system worked and how it failed. Every evening after work, he pored over Marlene's old case files. The evidence against her was weak. A shaky eyewitness, a fingerprint that could have come from any shopping trip, and the prejudice of a jury that never gave her a fair chance. Jamal made notes, highlighted inconsistencies, and studied similar cases where innocent people had been set free after years in prison. Lisa used her pen like a sword. She started writing articles about wrongful convictions, exposing how race and poverty often decided guilt more than facts. Her stories caught attention, first in small newspapers, then in larger outlets. She never mentioned Marlene's name at first, but her words carried the truth of her mother's suffering. Slowly, journalists and activists began to take notice. Michael added his gift. His artwork told stories without words, paintings of prison bars that turned into broken chains, portraits of mothers separated from children, sketches of faces full of pain and hope. His exhibitions drew crowds, and he always left a quiet message written beneath his art. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Grace, with her voice, became their light. She sang at community rallies, vigils, and fundraisers. Her songs of pain and hope touched people's hearts. Listeners often cried, asking her afterward what inspired her music. She would only smile softly and say, "Someone I love is waiting to come home." Together they became unstoppable. They gathered every document, every testimony, every lead that had been ignored. Jamal contacted organizations that specialized in freeing innocent prisoners. At first many said no, they had too many cases already. But Jamal refused to give up. He knocked on doors, sent letters, and made phone calls until finally, one group agreed to look into Marlene's case. The children's hope grew stronger. For the first time in nearly 20 years, it felt possible that the truth could finally be heard. The fight was not easy. They faced rejection, delays, and people who told them to let it go. Some in the town still believed Marlene was guilty. Old neighbors whispered, "Why stir up the past?" Others warned the children that the system rarely admitted its mistakes. But the siblings held on to the lessons Marlene had drilled into them since childhood. Never let the world's cruelty decide who you are. They pushed forward, step by step. Jamal and the lawyers uncovered hidden police reports that had never been shown in court. Lisa tracked down a retired clerk who remembered details of the trial that didn't add up. Michael drew powerful pieces that caught the attention of national media. And Grace sang at a charity concert where she told the crowd through tears, "My mother has been in prison for 20 years for a crime she didn't commit. Please help us bring her home." The audience stood in silence, then applause thundered through the hall. Reporters wrote about it the next day, and suddenly Marlene's case was no longer a forgotten file in a dusty cabinet. It was a story people wanted to know. The siblings visited Marlene in prison more often now, their voices full of new hope. When they told her about the progress they were making, Marlene cried for the first time in years, not from pain, but from the overwhelming love she felt. "You're fighting for me," she whispered through the glass, her hands pressed against theirs. "But you don't know, you already gave me freedom. In here I've lived on your love. That's what kept me alive." Her words only strengthened their resolve. They wanted more than survival for her. They wanted justice. Months turned into years of work. They faced setbacks, documents lost, appeals denied, hearings postponed. Each time disappointment cut deep, but they never gave up. Jamal reminded them constantly. Mama didn't give up on us. We can't give up on her. Then one day, a breakthrough came. New DNA testing, unavailable at the time of the trial, proved that the evidence found at the crime scene did not match Marlene at all. It belonged to another man, a known criminal who had committed similar robberies. The discovery shook the foundation of the old case. The lawyers filed for a new hearing, and the siblings poured every ounce of energy into preparing. Lisa wrote an explosive article exposing the injustice. Michael created a piece of art called 20 Years Stolen that spread across social media. Grace sang on national television, her trembling voice reaching millions. And Jamal stood in court, not just as a son, but as a trained advocate ready to fight with every word. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled with reporters, activists, and community members. The siblings sat together, their hands clasped tightly. For 2 decades, they had carried the weight of pain and sacrifice. Now it was time to see if justice would finally open its eyes. And as the judge entered the room, Marlene was brought in wearing her prison uniform. She lifted her head and saw her children, now grown adults, sitting strong and proud. For the first time in years, her eyes shone with true hope. The fight was reaching its climax, and the children knew this was only the beginning of the final battle to bring their mother home. Truth revealed. The courtroom was silent. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath as Marlene sat down beside her lawyers. Her hair had turned gray. Her face carried the lines of 2 decades in prison, but her eyes still held that same quiet strength her children remembered. She looked across the room at them, Jamal, Lisa, Michael, and Grace, no longer children but adults who had turned their pain into power. She gave them a small smile. For the first time in years, it wasn't a smile of forced courage. It was a smile of hope. The lawyers began to present the new evidence. They showed the DNA test results proving that the crime scene evidence did not belong to Marlene. They explained how sloppy the original investigation had been, how officers had ignored other suspects, and how prejudice had led to Marlene becoming the easy target. Then came the witness testimonies. Jamal had tracked down an old neighbor who remembered seeing Marlene at home on the night of the crime. Lisa had found a retired police officer who admitted that pressure from the town had rushed the case to trial. Piece by piece, the walls of lies that had trapped Marlene began to crumble. The judge listened carefully, flipping through the thick folder of new documents. The prosecutor tried to object, but his argument sounded weak compared to the mountain of truth standing in front of him. Then it was time for the children to speak. Jamal was the first. He stood tall, his voice steady. "Your Honor," he said, "my mother took in 4 kids who had no one else. She worked every day and every night to keep us alive. She didn't just give us food and shelter, she gave us love. She gave us hope. She could never take a life because she spent her whole life saving lives. We're not just asking for her freedom. We're asking for the truth to finally be heard." Lisa followed. She held up one of her notebooks, filled with years of letters she had written to Marlene. "I grew up writing to my mother in prison," she said. "Every word in here is proof of her innocence, because innocence doesn't just live in evidence. It lives in the way she raised us. The world tried to break her, but she never let go of love. Isn't that the very definition of justice? To protect those who protect others?" Michael walked forward next, carrying a framed drawing. It showed Marlene in prison clothes, holding her children's hands through the bars. He set it on the table in front of the judge. "This is what we lived for 20 years, he said softly. "But Mama told us never to give up. So I drew, I painted, and I kept her alive in every piece of art I made. Today, I want the world to see her for who she really is. Not a prisoner, but a mother who sacrificed everything for us." Finally, Grace stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew strong, filling the courtroom. She sang just a few lines of the song Marlene used to hum in their tiny kitchen, the one that always reminded them of home. The sound brought tears to nearly every eye in the room. When she finished, she wiped her cheeks and said, "Mama always told me music heals. Today I wanted to heal this court too. My mother is innocent. Please let her come home." The courtroom was no longer silent. People in the audience whispered, some wept, others nodded with agreement. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the story of Marlene Johnson began to spread beyond that single room. The judge called for order, but his expression had softened. He looked at Marlene, then at her children, and finally down at the papers in front of him. This court acknowledges, he said slowly, that the original conviction of Marlene Johnson was deeply flawed. New evidence combined with testimony and DNA results proves she was wrongfully convicted. Therefore, this court overturns the original verdict and grants her immediate release. The room erupted. Reporters rushed to capture the moment. The children cried out, rushing toward their mother. Guards unlocked the chains around her wrists, and for the first time in 20 years, Marlene stood free. She turned and opened her arms wide. Jamal was the first to reach her, holding her tight as if he'd never let go. Lisa pressed her face against her mother's shoulder, sobbing. Michael wrapped both arms around them, tears running down his cheeks. And Grace, her voice breaking, whispered over and over, "Mama, you're home. You're home." Marlene held them all, her body trembling. "My babies," she whispered, kissing their foreheads. "You saved me. I told you to be strong, and you were stronger than I ever dreamed." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as the family walked hand in hand. Reporters shouted questions, asking how they had found the strength to fight so long. Jamal answered simply, "Our mother taught us love. Love gave us the strength to fight. And love is what brought her home." Marlene looked up at the sky, tears streaming down her face. She had lost 20 years of her life to injustice, but she had gained something greater. 4 children who had turned her sacrifice into triumph. The truth had finally been revealed. Justice had finally spoken. And as the family walked away together, Marlene whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The world had taken her freedom once, but her children had given it back. Freedom and full circle. The day Marlene stepped out of prison, the sun felt different on her skin. For 20 long years, she had lived behind cold walls and metal bars, where light was filtered through tiny windows. Now standing in the open air, she tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and let the warmth of freedom soak into her bones. Beside her stood the 4 children she had once rescued from the streets, no longer kids, but strong adults. They surrounded her like a shield, holding her hands, guiding her steps. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Marlene barely noticed. Her focus was only on the faces she loved most. "My babies," she whispered, smiling through tears. "You did it. You brought me home." The first night back was filled with emotions none of them could control. At Jamal's apartment, they cooked a meal together. It wasn't fancy, just fried chicken, rice, and biscuits, but for Marlene, it tasted better than any feast. She sat at the table, watching her children laugh and pass food around. The last time she had seen them like this, they were small, huddled in her tiny living room, scared of the world. Now they were grown, full of confidence and strength. Her heart swelled with pride. Grace leaned against her shoulder. "Mama, sing with me like you used to," she begged. Marlene chuckled, her voice shaky. "My voice is rusty after all these years." "Doesn't matter," Grace said, smiling. So Marlene sang softly, and soon all 4 joined in. Their voices rose together, filling the room with warmth. It was not just a song, it was a prayer, a promise, a celebration. Still, adjusting to freedom was not easy. The world had changed while she was gone. Technology confused her, and sometimes the noise of the city felt overwhelming after so many years of silence. She woke up in the middle of the night, half expecting prison guards to call her name. But each time fear crept in, one of her children was there. Jamal walked her through using a cell phone. Lisa sat with her, reading aloud the articles she had written about justice. Michael gave her one of his drawings, a portrait of her free, arms open wide, and hung it on the wall where she could see it every morning. Grace sang her to sleep when nightmares kept her awake. For the first time in decades, Marlene realized she wasn't carrying the burden alone. Her children had become her strength, just as she had once been theirs. Soon, their story spread far beyond their small town. News stations aired interviews, highlighting the injustice Marlene endured and the unbreakable bond of her family. People across the country sent letters of support. Some even donated money to help her rebuild her life. But Marlene wasn't thinking about fame or sympathy. She thought only of purpose. "God left me here for a reason," she told her children one night. "I can't get back the years I lost, but I can use what time I have to help others." Together they started a foundation to support families torn apart by wrongful convictions. Jamal used his legal skills to guide cases. Lisa wrote powerful stories that exposed hidden truths. Michael created art that raised awareness and funds. Grace performed at benefit concerts, her songs carrying messages of hope and justice. And Marlene, with her quiet wisdom, spoke to mothers, prisoners, and communities, reminding them never to lose faith in love. The town that once judged her began to see her differently. People who had whispered against her now approached with apologies. Some even asked how they could help. Marlene accepted their words, not with bitterness but with grace. Hate can't heal a broken heart, she told them. Only love can. Her children admired her even more. After all the pain she endured, she still chose forgiveness over anger. That, they realized, was her greatest strength. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, the family gathered for a celebration. Michael had finished an art exhibit, Lisa had published her first book, Jamal had opened his own law office, and Grace was preparing for her first album release. They all came together at the same table, the same laughter filling the air as it once had in that small apartment decades earlier. As the sun set, Marlene stood, her eyes shining with tears. "Do you know what today reminds me of?" she asked. "What's that, Mama?" Jamal said. "The night I found you," she whispered. 4 little souls, hungry and scared, sitting on a sidewalk. "I thought I was saving you. But now I see the truth. You saved me. I gave you love and you gave me life back. That's what family means. That's what full circle looks like." Her children hugged her tightly, each whispering words of gratitude. For them, Marlene wasn't just their rescuer. She was their home, their compass, their hero. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Marlene sat quietly, listening to the laughter of her children. She no longer felt the weight of prison chains nor the sting of injustice. She felt peace. 20 years had been stolen from her, but love had given her something even greater. She had lived to see her children grow into the very people who freed her. And as she closed her eyes for a moment, she whispered softly, "I am free, truly free."